Argentinian President Javier Milei delivered a speech at this year's World Economic Forum on a myriad of topics, ranging from GDP and growth rates to capitalism and wealth. Let's listen to some of that.
Far from being the cause of our problems, free trade capitalism as an economic system is the only instrument we have to end hunger, poverty, and extreme poverty across our planet. The empirical evidence is unquestionable. Therefore, since there is no doubt that free enterprise capitalism is superior in productive terms, the left-wing doxa has attacked capitalism, alleging matters of morality, saying, that's what the detractors claim, that it's unjust. They say that capitalism is evil because it's individualistic and that collectivism is good because it's altruistic, of course, with the money of others. So they therefore advocate for social justice. But this concept, which in the developed world became fashionable in recent times, in my country has been a constant in political discourse for over 80 years. The problem is that social justice is not just, and it doesn't contribute either to the general well-being. Quite on the contrary, it's an intrinsically unfair idea because it's violent. It's unjust because the state is financed through tax, and taxes are collected coercively.
Here's some more of what he had to say about social justice.
Those who promote social justice, the advocates, start with the idea that the whole economy is a pie that can be shared differently. But that pie is not a given. It's wealth that is generated in what Israel Kirzner, for instance, calls a market discovery process. If the goods or services offered by a business are not wanted, the business will fail unless it adapts to what the market is demanding. If they make a good quality product at an attractive price, they will do well and produce more. So the market is a discovery process in which the capitalists will find the right path as they move forward. But if the state punishes capitalists when they're successful and gets in the way of the discovery process, they will destroy their incentives, and the consequence is that they will produce less, the pie will be smaller, and this will harm society as a whole.
All right, Jess, so some pretty heavy, harsh words against social justice there. Do you think that his views of social justice align with what you might say social justice is, or is it something different?
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, social justice and the economic system a country has are two very different political phenomena. To say that you're coupling having a socialist or collectivist economy with social justice efforts, those two things are just not one and the same. I know plenty of working Americans that are entirely fed up with the reality that the bottom 50% of the country has just 2.6% of the nation's wealth. When you have this kind of wealth disparity, the fact that you can defend the system of capitalism as being so much better than a collectivist or a more socialist society is absurd. When you have a greater distribution of wealth in a lot of these socialist countries, you can think of Scandinavian countries, countries like Belgium and Moldova, where you look at the Gini coefficient, you look at the distribution of income as measured, and it's nearly half of what you see in the United States as far as how much we differentiate from the Lawrence curve, which is our measure of, a perfectly distributed wealth in a country. Of course, there's no country that has perfect distribution of wealth, but the United States, when you have just 2.6% in the bottom 50%, you have the majority of the country having almost no economic control. When you see stagnation of wages and no sharing of profits with workers in these companies, that is an entirely different issue from the kinds of social justice issues where you're fighting for LGBTQ plus rights. You can have someone who is terribly racist, unfortunately, but is someone who believes that the workers should have their fair share. If they're working to produce something of value in the economy, it's being sold and someone's making a profit, they deserve a cut of that profit. When we think of the corporate structure we have in the United States, it's not this kind of scenario where the venture capitalist or the entrepreneur participating in the free market is the person that is incentivized to run a successful business. Oftentimes, it's shareholders that are reaping the benefits, and the person that's the head of the company is paid a set salary in order to run it. they're not incentivized by profits to run the company. Perhaps they get a bonus, but they are not getting what the shareholders are getting. And so this kind of structure where you have, the top 50%, you can even say the top 20% that are shareholders and companies reaping the benefits of all of the workers' labor in the economy, that is unfair. That's something that you can fight even if you disagree with everything else that social justice warriors are fighting for.
Yeah, I would push back on the idea that entrepreneurs aren't incentivized to build companies. I mean, your example holds if you're talking about a CEO who was installed of a mega corporation that already existed. But when you're talking about building something from the ground up, yes, if you go public, shareholders get involved, but you also have the opportunity to sell your company for a huge profit. And there's also a huge value, I think, that people get out of being productive citizens, as well as feeling like they've been able to build something with their own two hands, with their own ingenuity, and provide a service to people. But let's go a little bit broader on this question of socialism versus capitalism. Javier Milei is 100% correct that capitalism has 100% lifted the most people in history out of poverty. Wealth inequality is a given in any system, even in the so-called socialist systems that you mentioned. Those countries have large social safety nets, but by definition are generally not what we would consider socialism or socialistic. They still allow people to work in jobs that they want. They still allow social mobility. It's not an entirely take and redistribute economy in the sense that we would normally think of socialism. But I agree in some sense that the United States has too much income inequality, and the pushback on that would be that it's not a zero-sum game, the economy. People can get wealthier together. A rising tide lifts all boats. But generally, income inequality does lead to other social ills that are not great. It can lead to more crime. It can lead to resentment between the classes and class warfare, and a lot of instability. So I would agree with you that income inequality generally is a problem, but not in the sense that the people at the bottom in America are somehow so much worse off than people around the globe. America is still an incredibly wealthy country with a very high standard of living. Our poor are incredibly better off than anywhere else pretty much around the world, with the exception of a few European countries that have a larger social safety net. We also have to consider that those countries are have a much smaller population and are very homogenous in terms of culture and demographics. The United States has a much harder time providing the same programs that these countries do simply by sheer size, as well as the fact that our country is so stratified across race, class, religion, etc. So I think that's one of the reasons why those countries fare much better with the systems that they have. But generally speaking, capitalism, it cannot be denied, has been a great benefit to the vast majority of people who live under a capitalist system.
Yes, if anyone wants to hear more of my thoughts on the economic system we have in the United States and the one we should have, you can watch my TED Talk. But if anyone wants to hear more of Milei's thoughts on social collectivism from the Economic World Forum, we have that for you too. Let's watch.
Given the dismal failure of collectivist models and the undeniable advances in the free world, socialists were forced to change their agenda. They left behind the class struggle based on the economic system and replaced this with other supposed social conflicts which are just as harmful to life as a community and to economic growth. The first of these new battles was the ridiculous and unnatural fight between man and woman. Libertarianism already provides for equality of these sexes. The cornerstone of our creed says that all humans are created equal, that we all have the same unalienable rights granted by the Creator, including life, freedom, and ownership. All that this radical feminism agenda has led to is greater state intervention to hinder the economic process, giving a job to bureaucrats who have not contributed anything to society. Examples, ministries of women or international organizations devoted to promoting this agenda. Another conflict presented by socialists is that of humans against nature, claiming that we human beings damage the planet, which should be protected at all costs, even going as far as advocating for population control mechanisms or the bloody abortion agenda.
Fascinating. I love the way he's coupling really the feminism the unnatural fight between woman and man, which is a hilarious way to put it. Perhaps there's some translation there that makes this a bit different. I did see someone on Twitter say this is a quite good translation, so maybe it is, maybe it's not. Fascinating thing to say nonetheless. I think also framing socialism as something that is unnatural, very fascinating. Adam Smith, who's considered the father of economics and the father of capitalism by some, he theorized that human beings became the dominant species on the planet because we learned to work together and we accomplished more than we could separately. That's why we live in a society. We're social creatures. And so it is very natural for human beings to work together. I'm always skeptical of someone who argues against something without defining it. So arguing against socialism without really saying what it is. And I think what a lot of people are fighting for economically across the world, which clearly that's what he's referring to, is they want a more fair work structure. They are a part of an economy. They shop in the economy. They buy houses in the economy, food, cars. They live within the economy. They have to work within this economy in order to provide for themselves. If they have no choice but to get a job and work for a living, they should have some say in what's produced. They should have some share of what they make with their own two hands while they're at work. That is what a lot of people are fighting for. So making it something else and arguing against that while ignoring the reality of what people really want and what people are fighting for around the world is just very dishonest to me.
I would love to tackle his comment about the fight between men and women because I actually completely agree with what he's saying there. So what he's referring to is the idea that feminism has held up men and women not just as equals in terms of endowed with equality from the creator, but equals in the sense that they are the same. And that's just fundamentally false. Men and women biologically are very, very different people. They have different desires. They have different ways of thinking about the world. They have different wants, different needs. And men and women complement each other. And instead, over the past 20 years, thanks to third wave feminism, we've been fighting each other. We've been trying to jostle for positioning on this apparent scale of social hierarchy instead of accepting our God-given talents and our gifts and the way that we were created and how those things, leaning into those things, can make us happy, productive citizens that work with one another and complement one each other, rather than trying to prove who is better or who needs to be helped or raised up or who needs to break the glass ceiling. So that's what he's referring to there, is this sort of fight that women, in the pursuit of being equal to men, are actually trying to become like men as opposed to embracing their natural femininity. But I hope we get to talk about socialism and capitalism and all of this more in another segment as well, because obviously we did not even scratch the surface. We'll be back with more Rising after this.